Hello and welcome to tonight's panel discussion for helping young people navigate grief and loss. I'm going to preface my statements by saying I'm going to talk pretty quickly so I can get through all the stuff in the front end so we can get to the real conversation. So I apologize if I speak really fast. But my name is Kristen Pierce-Freaky. I'm the Executive Director at Austin Child Guidance Center, and I'm going to be the moderator for tonight's panel. This discussion is part of our panel discussion series for those who are interested in learning more about uncomfortable and sensitive topics and how to address them with children. A little bit about ACGC. We have a 70-year history of providing accessible, high-quality, trauma-informed mental health services to children and their families in Greater Austin and Central Texas. We focus on three main program areas: care and treatment, which includes individual, family, group therapy, psychological assessment and consultation, and psychiatric services. We also offer the only children's walk-in clinic in Central Texas that we are aware of. We also have a training and professional development program, which offers opportunities for staff and community groups to have training in various clinical and trauma-informed care and other kinds of areas of training. And finally, we offer community education and awareness events. Those are free parent workshops, panel discussions like this, podcasts, and other presentations that we offer free to the community. We really believe that you don't have to be an individual client of Austin Child Guidance Center to benefit from a lot of our services, and we really want to provide as many services to the community as we can. ACGC employs a multi-licensed team of trained social workers, therapists, psychologists, and psychiatrists who manage a wide range of services. Currently, because of the current Omicron variant, we are offering our services via teletherapy, but we look forward to resuming in-person services sometime next month when it's once again safe to do so. Through the use of teletherapy, we are able to provide care for children or teens up to the age 17 in the entire state of Texas. Most of our clients are in Central Texas, but any person in the state can be seen by us if they choose. Our goal is, of course, to provide quality mental health care and in a safe and equitable and healing space for children and their families. And so as part of that work, we work to confront systemic barriers to mental health, discrimination, and economic injustice in our community. Finally, you are invited to join us for ACGC Family Fest and Austin Originals on April 2nd, 2022 at the Circuit of the Americas. That daytime event is from 11 to 2, and we have a benefit concert that evening being headlined by the one and only Diana Ross at 8 p.m. More information can be found about that event on our website, which is austinchildguidance.org. Tickets are also available at Ticketmaster. So that's the end of my commercial. So I just want to take a minute to do some housekeeping. Once again, we're asking everybody who's not a panelist to keep their cameras off and remain muted. If you have a question or a comment, please put those in the chat. We will be responding very regularly to the chat for any questions. You can direct questions specifically to panelists or just to anyone on the panel. It's up to you. We ask that you keep the questions related to the topic at hand, just because, there's a lot of, we're not going to be able to get to everything on this topic in 90 minutes. And if we kind of veer off, we'll kind of never get everybody's questions answered. We want to acknowledge that everybody comes to these discussions with different perspectives and experiences and political views. We ask that you're respectful of others who might not be in the same place that you're in. We acknowledge that this is a difficult topic and may make some people uncomfortable. So we ask that you just allow room for the conversation to happen. And finally, we ask that you refrain from any abusive language towards others participating in this discussion. We do remove people from the platform if and when that happens, but I'm happy to say it's never happened. So with that out of the way, I'm going to introduce our panelists. Each comes with a deep knowledge, commitment, and passion for children, families, and advocating for ways our society can better address issues facing children and teens. I'm going to start with Corinne Barnacle, a licensed marriage and family therapist and clinical child life specialist. Corinne graduated from Louisiana Tech University with a bachelor's in family and child studies, concentrating in child life. She received her graduate degree from Louisiana Tech University in family and consumer sciences with a concentration in family and child development. Corinne decided to continue her education further and attended St. Edward's University to complete a Master's of Arts in Counseling. She provided therapeutic support for families and groups of children coping with a parent's illness at Wonders and Worries for 13 years in Austin. She currently resides in Savannah, Georgia as a child and youth behavioral, military, and family life counselor and operates a part-time private practice in her community. So thank you for joining us, Corinne. Sarah Reisner is a bilingual licensed professional counselor associate. Sarah is a native Spaniard who made Austin her home 17 years ago. Sarah earned her bachelor's degree in psychology at UT Austin and her master's degree in counseling at NYU, and is currently providing services at Austin Child Guidance Center to bilingual children who are survivors of trauma. Sarah finds immense joy working with children and adolescents and embraces a multilingual and multicultural therapeutic approach and is deeply passionate about empowering individuals. Sarah believes one of the most effective ways to promote mental wellness is to ensure information and psychoeducation is available to everyone. Welcome, Sarah. Rachel Saffer, licensed clinical social worker and supervisor, has been with the Austin Center for Grief and Loss since 2014 and the Director of Children's Services since 2018. In addition to being a therapist, Rachel is also a certified kids yoga instructor. Rachel provides grief therapy to individuals and groups from the ages of 4 to 18, as well as a grief camp, Camp Redbird, during the summer. Rachel uses various interventions with clients, including therapeutic yoga, EMDR, and child-centered play therapy. Thank you so much, Rachel, for participating with us. So now I'm going to introduce our topic. And I'm going to apologize in advance if you can hear my little dogs barking in the background, because sorry about that. Anyway, so the holiday season can really be a difficult time for families, and many families feel the loss of their loved ones more acutely. And this may be particularly true for children who have a harder time processing the experience of loss. The ongoing pandemic has disrupted the ways that help people to cope with death and dying, like attending a funeral or visiting family members who are hospitalized. The post-holiday period is often a good time to identify kids who may still be suffering and need some additional support. So tonight we'll discuss the mental health impact on children from experiencing grief and loss, given the challenges of today's pandemic, and what we as caregivers can do to help them heal. We remind the audience that tonight's discussion is not a debate and ask that you be respectful of others' thoughts and opinions. So I'm going to start with you, Corinne. In your definition, what is grief and loss and what causes it?
Good evening, everybody. So I think that whenever people hear those two words and they put them together, grief and loss, we typically think of death and someone close to us dying. And obviously that is true. We do lose people, and COVID, obviously, we've done that a lot. However, I feel like there's a big umbrella that we could put different types of losses under, things that maybe we don't think of as a loss. So, loss of a pet, or changing of a home, changing into a new school, divorce in family. So there's lots of different types of losses. So yeah, I think that definitely we can touch base on whatever anyone needs to talk about tonight, but definitely lots of losses out there.
Anybody else on the panel want to kind of chime in on that definition before we move on?
I'll just say that we see a variety of losses, and one of the most common ones we're starting to see is family separation or deportation loss. We see that in a lot of the schools, especially in Hayes County area. We're seeing a lot of separation, family separation and deportation. So that's another type of loss that kids are experiencing.
And so, let's talk a little bit about some of the mental health impacts on children when they're experiencing grief and loss, how it affects their social and academic lives, and maybe how children experience or communicate grief differently from people of other age groups. And I'm going to kind of open this to anybody on the panel who wants to address this.
I'll go. Hello, everybody. So I think that in a way, we're speaking about children, right? And I think that children have very similar reactions than we do. They may have less skills and less ways to show what's going on. So they may not be able to use their language so much and express that, depending on developmental level of the child. So I think a lot of what we can see in children, a lot of times we think about sadness, right? And crying and all of that, but we can see a lot of anger and explosive behaviors, or a lot of numbing and withdrawing from wanting to be with friends and family. I think one thing that kind of surprises parents sometimes is the way that children would just play out all of these things during play. They would use their drawings and their play to recreate and get out a lot of these feelings and emotions that they don't quite know how to handle or how to process, right? So while it may seem strange, I think that it's totally normal and healthy that some of these things are coming out during play and things like that.
Yeah, I provide a lot of psychoeducation to parents about what play actually does, because sometimes I get well, if they're just playing, then why are they coming to you? And it's not just playing, it is how they make sense of their world. They act out what is happening because that's how they understand it. That is their language. So I do a lot of explaining, like, it may seem like we're just playing, but they're playing and I'm taking in what they're doing and how they're acting while they're playing.
I mean, obviously in the context of COVID, right, grief and loss takes on an even larger kind of meeting because there's big and little losses all over the place. And I'm just curious, you know, Sarah, I'm going to direct this kind of to you first. In the context of COVID, you know, do you think that the grief or loss in children looks different? But I guess I think I would ask you also, like, what are some of the other losses? We talked about some losses that are kind of specific to the COVID experience that we've all had over the last couple of years.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Yes, so there are a lot of specifics about COVID, right? I think a very big thing that comes with all the losses and all the grief that COVID has brought for everybody, and especially for the children, is fear and shame and guilt of speaking up. And I'm not going to get political here, but whether you're on one side or another, there is such an opposition and there's such a polarity out there that I feel a lot of kids, when they're dealing with grief and loss through COVID, they're afraid of talking about it, and how that's going to be received. It's become a little bit of a taboo subject, right? Grief was already a little bit like that, and I think at this point it's even more so. With that specifically, I think that we have seen a lot of internalizing for children, and a lot of we're not supposed to talk about these. Does that answer your question, Christine?
A little bit, yeah. No, I mean, I think that it's difficult to complain, or for some kids to sort of complain when they see their parents struggling, when they see, you know, there's a lot of kind of, as you pointed out, differing opinions about how to handle the epidemic and how we should be behaving and this and that. And so, you know, I can imagine if you're a child in the midst of all of that, it probably is very difficult to kind of find your space, or to sort of, do you want to introduce your feelings or concerns in the midst of all kinds of things that are going on in your family? Corinne or Rachel, I encourage you guys to share any other comments that you may have as well. Sorry, did I interrupt you, Sarah?
No, I was going to clarify something. So specifically, I'm talking of being afraid of talking about a parent dying from COVID or a family member dying from COVID, and that opening up a conversation that a kid may not be wanting to have at all, right? Like, they're grieving, they're having this big loss, and all of a sudden they found in the midst of this other thing, and the grieving gets put aside. So I hope that clarifies a little bit what I was saying.
Thank you.
And, you know, Kristen, I think to kind of add to what Sarah was saying, I think you asked, you know, has grieving changed for children due to COVID and the way that we do things? And obviously, the way we can say goodbye right now is very shifted. Whether, you know, you have a parent in the hospital and there's so many protocols where they can have one visitor and kids can't come say goodbye to that parent or that caregiver. And then not being able to see and have a ritual of a funeral, one that where you sit and you hug and you don't have a mask on and you can, you know, handshake and do all those things that sometimes we know that kids need to have the finality of death. And, you know, seeing that through a webcam or not being able to even have a ceremony or celebration of life for a loved one. Those ceremonies have definitely had to shift during this time, which is really hard for kids not being able to say goodbye.
I want to talk about also sort of some of the losses that are not necessarily related to death and dying, but losses related to spending time with your friends, losses related to family vacations, losses related to, you know, visiting grandparents at the holidays. You know, I've just, you know, would love for you guys to talk about how some of those losses are manifesting in kids and how we can identify some of the ways that they are expressing their feelings about that. And, you know, what are some things that parents and caregivers can do to mitigate some of these things?
Well, one thing that I've seen, especially with younger kids, is that their social skills have been delayed or halted, especially younger kids who, you know, when the pandemic started, maybe had been in daycare and were about to start pre-K or something like that. They lost time with developing those skills. And so now they're developing them, even though they may be in pre-K or kindergarten now when they should have already been developing them. And with the older kids, it's the lack of being able to just see their friends. They've been struggling with that a lot. And even now that they're back in school, that is still different. They still have to leave every other seat in the cafeteria and things like that. So I've been seeing a lot of kids who just are tired of not being able to be with their friends. And it comes out in a lot of behavioral ways.
Can you give a couple examples of some of the behavioral things that you're seeing that are manifestations of those feelings?
Yes, I can actually give an example of my niece. She is 11 and she has entered the angsty teen phase already because she isn't able to let it out and just be with her friends instead of being with her younger siblings. She's been with her younger siblings essentially for 2 years. And she is now, everything is a big sigh or an eye roll or things like that. So I've noticed that with the older kids. Middle kids tend to be very sensitive about things, and little things turn into big problems. And then the younger kids, they're acting like little adults because they've been around adults for so long. Those are just some things that I've seen.
There's a comment in the chat, and I just want to make sure we address that. So obviously, incidents of depression and anxiety, suicidal ideation, hospitalization, suicide attempts, all of these things have dramatically increased for the general population as well as for children and adolescents in the last 2 years, especially among adolescent girls. And so, you know, we would be remiss to not kind of speak to that directly. You know, we certainly at ACGC are seeing a lot more children coming in for much more severe depression and severe anxiety. And so how, you know, one of the things that we've kind of talked about is just like when kids miss out on some of the social things that we've been talking about, those for kids are coping mechanisms. Like they cope with sort of the day-to-day life of being a child or being an adolescent by socializing, by, you know, doing things with friends, by, you know, and all those things. Many of those things have now been taken away or dramatically reduced for a lot of kids. And so, you know, the manifestation of that is more time on social media, more time on screens, more time isolated, more time alone. Can you guys speak to these issues and what you're seeing, and how to help parents to address some of these things that can be potentially very scary in their kids? Anyone jump in?
So, Kristen, I think that, you know, what we could, you know, help parents understand is that during no matter what age development their kiddos are, you know, this is just a really tough time. And there's a lot of flexibility that I feel like needs to be had for everybody right now. I know the school that I work with, we're virtual this week. So, but then Monday we go back to in person, and they have all these new guidelines with COVID, and it's basically whatever that school wants to do is kind of what we have to go through. And I think that what we're seeing right now at my school with a lot of the girls is a lot of bullying, a lot of wanting to have control and doing it through social media, because they're not face to face with those people, you know, in the school. And so they're just using that as a platform to release. And I think that what we can do, you know, parents, just kind of make sure you're talking with your kids or your teens, especially teens, if they have a social media account, and just being honest and saying, you know, what's going on there? You know, is there someone talking to you? And then letting your school counselor know, and making sure that you're advocating and knowing who your school counselor is at the schools. So if your kiddo or your teen is having an issue, that they're aware of it and like roped into that as well, so they can help in a school.
Rachel or Sarah?
Yeah, I think that's super important, Corinne, and like definitely the use of the technology has increased a lot, right? To what you were speaking when you started that, saying that your school is now virtual and on Monday they go in person, and I want to speak to that because I think that's incredibly important. I think stability for children is a measure of safety. I think that's really important. And we've lost a lot of that. And these kids have been through a lot for a long time, right? And that can be incredibly frustrating for us adults too, because we also in this. So are the teachers. So, right? So one of the things that I think it's important to remember is that we do have some sort of control. So all of these things we don't have any control of what's happening with COVID, but we can create some sort of stability at home. Like maybe we can have a ritual that we do every day, or maybe we do have dinner together every day, or maybe, right, like a time where we play, even if it's only for 10 minutes every day, but creating stability within our schedules, I think can really help alleviate all of this non-stability that is out there and the fear that comes with that, especially for children.
Thank you, Sarah. I just want to acknowledge one of the comments in the chat. Sue, whose son was 9 when his father was killed, and then COVID hit 2 weeks later, and some of the behavior that he's been experiencing since then. And, you know, I guess I just first want to say I'm just so sorry. I mean, that's tragic, tragedy on top of tragedy. And of course, what he's doing makes total sense. I mean, I can't imagine a scenario that would make one more angry than a loss of a parent, and then a loss of all these sort of freedoms and the supports that come with friends and family, and not being able to interact with them. And the challenge of not, of sort of virtual therapy, right? In many instances for a very long time. And I know that that's, we at AC, we reopened in October. And we have mostly been open since then, but again, we've kind of gone virtual for the last couple of weeks, but it's difficult. It's definitely difficult. And I guess I just want to see if any of you panelists would like to speak to this mom. Is somebody muted that I trying to talk? And sorry,
I was trying to unmute, but I couldn't.
Okay.
Sue, what your son is going through is really normal. And I know that some kids don't have success with virtual counseling. I'm still virtual. I've been virtual for almost 2 years now, and I have a lot of clients who have benefited from virtual counseling, even if at first they were a little hesitant. So I'm wondering if you would be willing to give it a try, and the therapist should be very understanding, like, let's try this a couple times and see how it works. I always offer that to my families is, I understand if this isn't going to work and I can help find you a referral for in-person. But a lot of kids that can't sit with virtual class actually can sit in therapy for 45 to 50 minutes, especially if it's in their own home, because they get to play with all their toys.
Is there any other kind of, in just sort of still addressing the issue around, how kids are coping, and what families can do? I mean, someone mentioned earlier about checking in with your kids and, especially those that are on social media. And I've just launched my youngest child sort of, and, I think many kids are much more technologically savvy than us parents. So, iPhones and other devices, it's very easy to hide things on those devices so that parents, even if they're looking, can't necessarily, you have to have a really technologically kind of savvy and up-to-date parent, I think in many cases, to sort of outsmart your kid in terms of, their technology. I think for me, a big part of it is having the kind of relationship with your kid where they'll tell you the truth and trust you. And so I guess I'm just curious, how to help parents to approach these things and what families can do, because the other piece of this is that, and I think Sarah mentioned it, adults are going through the same thing. And as many of you have seen in the news and things, plenty of adults are kind of losing it left and right on airplanes, in coffee shops, folks who are otherwise well-adjusted and kind of rational, reasonable humans are really kind of losing their cool. And I think that speaks to the level of angst and stress and trauma that we as a society are experiencing. So adults are struggling these days as well. And so if you're an adult that's struggling and you have children who are struggling, where do you find the bandwidth to support your kids? I mean, and we can talk about these things from a loftier perspective, but sort of just getting real about the realities of parenting and, the bandwidth that individual parents who are working either in the home or out of the home or whatever in this crazy environment. So can you guys speak to some of those things? Like, what are some practical things that families and parents can do to really connect with their kids at this time? And kind of operate like not just sort of a Band-Aid, but really kind of checking in.
I was hearing you. I'm like, this one's for me. Because I feel this very deeply, and I want to speak to something particular that you're saying, right? Which is there is this big myth that we need to have all the answers and we need to be okay in order to talk to our children or to have this time with them, right? And if any parent is hearing this right now that is feeling like that, I'm going to tell you that's a lie. You can talk to your kid from where you are, right? And actually, I think that may be the most important thing that we can do right now. Obviously, you're going to talk to your child according to their developmental level, right? You're not going to talk to your 3-year-old the same way you would talk to your 17-year-old. However, the message will kind of still be the same. It is okay to tell your kid, I'm struggling. I'm afraid. I don't have the answers. Now, you don't want to do it in a way that is so much, there's like, how can we help mom, right? But that can be so powerful to actually let your kiddo know that he's not alone, that you're going through this too. And I think that a lot of what you were talking about, Kristen, with this, you're running around and you're stressed and you're trying to get your kid into school and make sure he did his homework and like make dinner and like finish your work. And that can be a moment for of healing for yourself also. Like you can find that moment where you two are coming together and are bonding and saying, hey, I'm here for you. I don't know what to do necessarily, but we're in this together. And I'm feeling the same way. And I think that brings a sense of universality, right? We're all in this. We're all feeling this. Your feelings are not strange. You're not alone.
Thank you, Sarah. Corinne?
Can I piggyback off what Sarah was so graciously talking about? And yes, Sarah, like sharing emotions, painting a picture for your kiddos that you're having a hard day, maybe you're having a moment, and then you can model a coping skill for them. So you can say, okay, you know, mom needs to take 5 minutes outside. I'll be back in a few minutes. What are you going to do while I'm gone? What can you do? Can you go into this corner and play for a little bit until like you calm down? So giving kids coping mechanisms and then giving them choice. Sarah was talking about, you know, we don't have control over COVID. And if we're going to school or, you know, not going to school, if a parent has to be sent home because their kid needs to be in quarantine and then they have to work virtually. So all the flexibility, you don't have control, but what do you have control over? And that is your coping. You know, what is it that you like to do that helps your body feel good and your brain feel good? And giving choices to kids and modeling those behaviors to your kids, I think is super important, even though sometimes you're not going to model the best ones, and that's okay too.
Rachel, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I'll add that one of the first questions I always ask a parent or both parents or whoever the grown-up is in the first session I have is, how are you handling this? What are you doing to cope with this? And they'll help me. And if, you know, they're like, well, I'm going to be strong and I'm not going to show emotions, I'm always like, no, let's not do that. Let's model healthy grieving and healthy emotions. It's okay to not be okay with your kids. It's okay to tell them, you know what, I'm really sad today too, or I'm really confused today, I'm really worried today, and model it and talk about it. So they'll know it's okay to feel this way, and it's okay for me to talk about this with my parent. Now, a lot of times kids will see it and it's being modeled, but they won't do it right away. And eventually they start to open up and say, you know, I'm really worried about getting COVID at school, or I'm really mad that this person came to school with COVID, things like that. But always just keep modeling the healthy coping skills that you have, and they're learning them, even if they can't put them into effect right away.
Thank you for that. I want to acknowledge Candace's comment in the chat about her daughter. And it sounds like, Candace, sounds like your daughter was really having kind of a tough time, perhaps even before COVID started, and maybe this has exacerbated some of the things that were already going on in your family. First, before does any panelist want to kind of speak to this?
Sorry, I think we're trying to catch up with the chat.
That's okay. Well, while you guys are reading, I guess, I will sort of just quickly mention, I think one of the things, there's so many layers to what you're saying here, Candace. It does sound to me from what you've written there that your daughter is definitely feeling like she has no control over anything in her life or in her family. And that, and so if you can't control anything, and if, everything's bad is going to happen anyway, why bother, right? Could potentially be a perspective that she has. And I think, for lots of people, and this is true of adults, but it's certainly true for children, any attention is better than no attention. And even if that's negative attention, so some of the negative behaviors that she's exhibiting are drawing people to her, perhaps not in the ways that she would choose. And I'm sure definitely not in the way that your family would prefer. But, for her, she's not necessarily differentiating the difference between positive and negative attention. It's just attention, and she wants some, right? And she has had people, it sounds like, leave her and abandon her. And so, any way to keep people close is better than not having people close. And that's sort of just my, very, very superficial statement based on what I've read here. But I'm going to let the panelists kind of jump in and probably who could had a second to read it and can give it more thought. Corinne, did you want to jump in?
I can. So Candace, I saw, that you mentioned that you were a cancer survivor, and it sounds like, first off, you have a 12-year-old. So that's that preteen stage, which is just a really funky age in the first place. And then you add on all these different layers, like Kristen said, of loss after loss after loss. She's got a lot. She's got a lot of emotions going on. And so I would definitely just encourage looking at your community. If you live in Austin, like I know you said people are full, but maybe we can help direct and find someone for her to meet with. If you give us some more information, I'm sure Kristen might be able to navigate that for you. And it just sounds like you're going through a lot too. I would just encourage, maybe asking her to spend time with you, like connection time. Maybe she's just really wanting to connect with you. And maybe just sitting down and doing something that she likes to do, whether that be her favorite TV show or a board game, or letting her show you something on her computer if she's more of like a YouTube type person, and just trying to find some connection time. She might be needing that right now. I don't know. That's just a small glimpse of maybe something that might be helpful.
Rachel, did you or Sarah want to weigh in?
Yeah, I will weigh in. Yes, you are right. Everyone is full right now. For adults and kids, we are really going through a severe mental health crisis since COVID. So unfortunately, it is harder to find a therapist, but we can absolutely provide some resources and referrals. I have a wait list personally, so it's just everyone is really struggling to keep up with the demand for services right now. But I agree with what Corinne said, like you can connect with your daughter and give her a safe space just to be whatever she's feeling, and tell her, you know what, it's okay to be angry about anything that has happened. Let's figure out a way that you can put that anger somewhere that's safe, and how we can help you feel better when you think about what happened.
Also, I would just throw out there that if you are struggling to find someone, this might be an opportunity to access our walk-in clinic. I mean, we have a walk-in clinic to avoid wait lists. For years, ACGC had a long waiting list, and it was difficult, because a lot of times people didn't really get off the waiting list. And so the walk-in clinic allows us to not carry a waiting list, and so that people can be seen the same week, or this, within a couple of days of calling. So if that's an option that you think could potentially work, we can certainly just follow up with you afterwards if you'd like more information about that. And it's certainly available on our website. Sounds like they do a lot of things together, Games Walk. I think, and I'm just gonna sort of, what I would say, Candace, is that these things, on some level, when you have adolescents, like they're going to have a certain sense of themselves, and to some degree, you're not going to be able to talk them out of it. What I mean, I have an 18-year-old, she's a freshman in college. And I mean, all things considered, she's relatively well-adjusted, but, she definitely has moments where she spirals and, I'm never gonna, have good friends, and and so perceptions that she may have about herself or about her experience or whatever. I mean, no matter, you're the parent. If I say, no, you're beautiful, no, you're really smart, no, you're this, it's like they roll their eyes because, right, you're supposed to say that, you're my mom, is what I'm getting at. And so I think part of this is, sometimes recognizing that there's a little bit of that at play, and also just sort of staying the course, like in a world where everything seems kind of negative or not so good, if you are the safe space, or you are the point, like if she feels like no matter what, you're going to sort of be a supportive force in her life, even if she's not showing you that that's sort of meaningful to her, even if she's not telling you that that matters to her, it does, especially because you're the constant in her life, sounds like. And so, in all the ways that matter, like practically and emotionally, like you're the lifeboat, right? And so she definitely wants and needs your support and your kind of steadfast belief in her and her abilities, even if she's telling you that those things don't matter, or even if she's behaving in a way that would suggest that, you know, it's not penetrating. I think, and this is something that we were going to come up in our next topic, is sort of how to tell, at what point do we as parents kind of determine that our kids need professional help versus sort of just supports and things that we can offer as family members at home. And obviously it sounds like, Candace, your daughter, you've been seeking sort of professional help for her, but you know, there is a point at which typical sadness, you know, everybody feels anxiety sometimes. Anxiety is actually not a bad thing. Anxiety helps us to avoid potentially dangerous or harmful circumstances and situations. No emotions are bad. Negative emotions exist for a reason and they're helpful. Anger, normal anger is fine, right? It's not so much the feeling as much as it's like, what do you do with like the behavior? So feelings are non-negotiable, right? Nobody should be telling you how to feel, how not to feel. Feelings are not negotiable, but your behavior is something that, you know, everybody's responsible for, right? So perhaps normalizing the feelings of your daughter and then normalizing the feelings of our kids while helping them to separate feeling from behavior, right? So it's okay to be angry. It's not okay to beat up the dog or beat up your brother, right? It's okay to feel upset, but it's not okay to, you know, trash the bathroom at school, you know, so helping them to separate feelings from behavior. But I would love it if the panelists would chime in terms of sort of things that parents can identify in their children's behavior that separates sort of normal or typical sadness that's appropriate from something that's more pathological and requires professional intervention.
I can go, Kristen. So I think that's one of the number one things that parents that I've worked with have asked me, you know, like, how do I know my kid needs help or more than what we're offering? And I think there's some, like, definitely some red flags, some things that you can be aware of, that responses that might need additional support. And just some of the ones that I'm thinking of that come to mind are, you know, if your kid loves to go to dance or loves basketball, and then for some reason just loses interest in doing their daily activities or the things that they typically brought them so much joy, that's kind of a sign that maybe something might be going on. And then definitely if they're having issues sleeping and their sleep routine is like really off, and loss of appetite. So if they're not eating like they typically are, and those are some of the areas that we might want to go, hey, we might need a little extra support.
I also, sorry, I also kind of wanted to acknowledge, just because we're talking about grief and loss, that a lot of the things that Corinne is bringing up are normal during grief and loss, right? And how long is that happening? And is it getting worse instead of better? Would be something that we'll look at for grief and loss. So if you just lost a parent and you are having trouble sleeping and you're having nightmares, or your appetite is different, or all of these kind of things would be kind of normal behavior. But if that's getting worse or not getting any better, and it's taken a very long time to really see any progress, that will be something that we really want to pay attention to.
Thank you, Sarah, for chiming in. Yes, long trajectory. So obviously very normal responses to grief, but if it's lasting, you know, months and months and you're just not seeing anything get any better, then maybe that's just something to look into, that maybe they need a little extra support to get them back on track.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that one of the biggest things I have parents look for is this affecting their daily life? Are they having trouble sleeping? Are they having trouble eating? Are they complaining about stomach aches, headaches, things like that? And how long is it going on? Because if they get 3 months out, 4 months out, and it's still affecting their daily life, then something is going on. And I always suggest at that point, let's have a psyche eval done and rule out anything else. Let's have them have a physical, if they haven't had their annual physical yet, rule out any medical issues. And then we can tell if it's grief or if it's something else, because a lot of times grief mimics depression and it's hard to tell which is which. So that's one thing I always suggest is let's rule out medical and other mental health issues before we do anything else and see where to go from there. And then we can come up with another treatment plan on how we're going to address this.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Rachel. I wanted to also kind of just talk about kind of helping kids grief specific to school. So as we mentioned earlier, there are kids have teachers or school administrators who have passed away from COVID or other illnesses. They have classmates or schoolmates who have died by suicide. There are a lot of kind of extraordinary circumstances that are happening at school these days that contribute dramatically to grief and loss in our kids. And so I guess I just wanted to sort of open this up to the panelists to talk about how to support kids specific to schools. So I mean, at the elementary school level and certainly middle and high school age levels, statistically, and this is sort of outside of the population that ACGC typically serve, but like young adults and older adolescents are having a particularly tough time statistically around suicidal level statistics with regard to suicidal ideation and attempts. And so again, even though that's sort of among older kids and young adults, children are experiencing these things at younger and younger ages. And so we don't want to be flippant, or we don't want to sort of assume that because they're 10 or assume that because they're 12, they're not experiencing these things and they're not. Kids developmentally at those ages are very impulsive. One day might be the best day of their life. The very next day might be the worst day of their life. And on the worst day of their life, they might do something that they can't take back, right? So we always need to be paying attention. And even, if you've got really chatty kids who are constantly talking, I've had a couple of those, even though they're talking a mile a minute and sort of, you can't necessarily discount the things that they're saying. So if you guys could weigh in on some of the specific things around grieving and loss at school, I think I'd really appreciate that.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So Austin Grief provides grief groups in Title I schools throughout Central Texas. We're expanding to non-Title I schools as well, but I would suggest if you suspect that your child needs some support at school, call the school social worker, the school counselor, find out what resources might be available. Maybe they've heard of a few kids and they think, well, maybe we could start a group. Maybe we could have group once a week. Find out if your school has communities in schools. That's the one we partner with the most. Find out, is communities in schools running a grief group this semester? Or is it possible that you can look into it for next semester, things like that. But find out what is available at the school, because very often the schools don't know what they don't know. So if a teacher doesn't know that a kid is grieving, they're not going to be able to go to the school's social worker or CIS and say, hey, I have this kid that's struggling. What can we do? So advocate for your kids and say, look, my kid would benefit from this. Are there any other kids that we could form a group, or we could do individual counseling? Is that a possibility? Things like that. So that's my suggestion about supporting them in schools, is making the school aware that there is something going on so they know what to look for and look for ways to support your kids.
Thanks, Rachel.
I want to speak to something you just said, Rachel, because you mentioned school counselor. Talk to the school counselor. My daughter's school has been looking for a school counselor for over a year now. There is no school counselor in the school. And with that, I'm saying we need to give extra support, right? Schools are slammed. They really are. trying their best. I think that they're doing everything they can. And it's been really hard to keep even staff, to keep school, to keep subs, to keep, which is another thing that it's not constant in our kids' lives now, right? It makes it much harder to really see some of those things that we're talking about, which makes it way more important that we pay attention to those things at home. Because if my kiddo has a teacher today and a different teacher tomorrow and a different teacher the day after, they're not really gonna know.
Yeah, and I know that there is a struggle right now with staffing at schools. And for example, I know that Liberty Hill ISD has one social worker for the whole district. And I think Pflugerville is in a similar situation, but they are reaching out and looking for other resources to help them as well. If a school doesn't have a school counselor, that's another thing, but you can still advocate for more support in schools, even if there isn't a school social worker or counselor. It's just, one of the ways to get things moving, I've noticed.
Right, and the more we advocate, the more parents that advocate, the more that the school is going to realize this is really something that we need to spend our time into trying to figure out. Maybe it's not a school counselor, maybe we need to find other resources to really support our children. Absolutely agree, right?
And I think, obviously I work at a school and I don't have my own office. I sit in the counselor's office. So I see a flow of kids coming in on a daily basis with things they need to process and talk about. But then the counselor's trying to go do guidance of the whole class, and they can't focus on that kiddo. So maybe parents, one thing that you can do to kind of help support your kiddo or teen in school is helping them identify who is safe for you to go talk to at the school, because it might not be the school counselor. It might be their gym teacher who they love going to gym and they have a special relationship with that person, or the librarian or the STEM teacher. It might be someone else in that school they identify to go and speak with. And then maybe helping your child know, okay, what would happen? What would need to happen in my life to where I knew I need to go speak to somebody? So what would it look like? Oh, it would look like me not wanting to go play at recess with anybody, or me wanting to sit in the classroom alone and not sit. So helping them think through, when would I need help? What would it look like? Because they might not know. So you just maybe helping paint that picture for them of, okay, this is when I know I need to go maybe tell somebody I'm struggling.
Hey, Corinne, I know that there was a incident of a tragedy at the school that you're working at, and I wondered if you could share that, because that's an example of students coping with the loss of a faculty member in their community.
Yeah, so I work at a school, and we unfortunately at the very beginning of school lost a STEM teacher to COVID. And, that means he was a specials teacher, meaning that every kid in that school saw him. So they loved him. And unfortunately, he did die due to COVID. And what I experienced in that school is, kids were grieving that loss in so many different ways, and it had the biggest domino effect. So I'm typically, I know Rachel does groups. Usually I do small groups, sometimes with kids, or one-on-one, but I was pulled into an entire classroom, and the counselor was like, could you please come help me? And I was like, sure. And I had my little caddy of crayons, paper, and pipe cleaners. That's all that I had. And the entire class was crying. And I walk in, and they all start coming up to me saying, I'm so sad. I lost my uncle a couple of years ago, or I had a pet hamster and it died. So one death trickled so many different big emotions for this class. And the teacher didn't know what to do. She's like, I can't resume academics. There's no way these kids are going to get back on track. They need to process this. So the only thing that we could do was we had paper, and we asked the kids to either write to that person or write their story down or draw it, cry if they needed to. And the sweet girl, she just took one of my pipe cleaners and made a heart. And that caught on in the class, and everyone wanted to do that. And so they all made a heart and put it on the desks. and that resembled their love for that person or that thing or whatever it was that they were grieving. It was just a way for them to play it out and put it somewhere. And it was really powerful to watch.
Thank you for sharing that. That does speak to the idea, I think, that, in addition to a lot of the specific losses that people, children and adults are experiencing, I think these are also triggering for other, for other experiences, other losses, right? You could have lost a family member, a friend, a pet, and maybe not that they passed away, maybe they moved away, right? So there could have been other losses that took place prior to COVID, but all the things that have been going on in the last 2 years is just one massive trigger, right? We're all being triggered by a lot of the things that we're seeing and that are going on right now. And so for some kids, and some of them are examples that were in the chat, right? So some of these things happened before COVID, but COVID is either exacerbating or triggering, bringing these things back up. And so it's sort of like a domino effect, and sort of just being mindful that, as others have mentioned earlier, depending on the age of your child, they may not have the ability to communicate fully or in a way that makes sense to you exactly what it is that they're responding to. They're just mad, or they're just sad, or they just, are pissed, or whatever the thing is, right? And they're maybe not able to, or to articulate the specifics, because it's just right now just a massive feeling that they're needing to express in all these different ways. Anybody else want to speak to that?
Yeah, I wanted to say to that point, and how kids may be expressing some of their grief and their loss of any of the thousands of things that are happening in their life right now. And specifically to the schools, I think that one of the things that is really helpful is communicating really with your school, and keeping, being able to communicate with your kid's teacher, letting them know when there is a loss in your family, when there's, whether it's a death, or you just moved away, or you and dad got divorced. I think it really helps teachers when they understand where this kid is coming from, right? And when you bring that up to them, they have a better way to really provide coping skills for the kiddo, even if it's just like, do you need some time? And I've done this myself, and I typically, if I do that, I would tell the teachers, what is it that my kid likes? Look, my kid is having a hard time, and these are some of the things that he may do, because that's what I see him do at home, right? You know your kiddo, you know what he does when he's upset. And these are the things that he likes to do that make him feel better. Some kids really like to be left alone, right? Like maybe give him some time. He loves helping. Maybe you can give him a task to pass papers to the class when there is something to do. So don't take away your power and how much you truly really know your kiddo, and communicate with your teachers, because I think that is a recipe for success, and they feel seen, and your kiddo feels seen. And I just think it's a good strategy.
Thanks, Sarah. If anybody else has any other things that they'd like to put in the chat, or questions or specific things that we haven't addressed, please feel free to do so. But I wanted to just throw out there, I read a statistic the other day, and I can't remember from where, but it just said that use of devices has gone up 150% from pre-pandemic levels, which, makes sense in the context that a lot of kids are leaning on devices more to connect with their friends when they're not able to physically be with their friends or family. But I think it's important to remember that there's sort of like a really bizarre paradoxical effect that is sort of associated with social media, which is that I think statistically, and both for adults and kids, most people who are spending a lot of time on social media, it generally makes them feel worse about themselves, right? Because you're constantly comparing yourself to others. Usually you're comparing yourself to very idealized standards where there are people, professionals and celebrities with teams of people behind the scenes making them look flawless and beautiful and hair and makeup and all that, but they're presenting a very kind of perfect and idealized way of life or beauty image. And so most of us, again, regardless whether we're adults or kids, often kind of, if you spend too much time on social media, we wind up kind of just feeling bad about yourself. Simultaneously or paradoxically, there's all your dopamine, like, you get lots of hits to your dopamine, which is the sort of pleasure chemical when every time you get a hit or a like, or somebody comments on your post or whatever, right? So there's this kind of simultaneous negative impact, but also you kind of get this positive dopamine hits because you appreciate when people are kind of connecting to the things that you're posting or liking you. And so that increase in dopamine keeps you coming back because it's a pleasure center, right? And so you kind of keep wanting that thing that sort of on the one hand is sort of saying, yes, this is good, more. And on the other hand, you're just sort of feeling terrible about yourself. So that really vicious cycle, it exists for adults and it definitely exists for kids. And so I would just encourage parents, and I'm sure most of you or all of you are doing it already, but just to be even more mindful of the impact of, devices that in and of themselves are not the devil. Social media or excessive use of social media. And again, I've got kid who scrolls Instagram endlessly, or will kind of, it's like a rabbit hole. You go to YouTube to look up something specific and 30 minutes later, you're just like, you come back up because you kind of just got distracted and went and looked at 15 other things that you weren't really intending to do. And again, I mean, anything that is affecting adults, the kids are doing it the same. And so just really being mindful of monitoring screen time. I would encourage you to not really, if your kid has a cell phone, especially a smartphone, like maybe don't let them sleep with it in their room, like leave it on the charger in the living room or leave it somewhere else so that they're not looking at it in the middle of the night. I think it's really, really hard to manage this stuff, but I think it's worth it. To just sort of remain vigilant, and just the recognition that I'm not suggesting that kids should not use it, but just sort of really finding a balance and really monitoring it.
And Kristen, can I just add, yes, social media, it's, a beast, but also there's some wonderful things about it. And it is connecting kids these days, whether they have a TikTok dance and they share it and they post it and other people do it, it gets their body moving and it gets like their creative juices flowing. So there are some really good things. When I meet with girls, sometimes they go, well, I just want to be, an influencer. And there's some out there that make really good money and they get sponsors and they do well. So you can't be like, oh, that's not a good dream, because people are doing it. But I like to tell parents, take the stance of curiosity with your kid or teen about it and go, what's going on TikTok? What challenge is going on right now? Can you tell me about it? And maybe play a little dumb, even if there's some challenges that are really harmful out there, because there are, and just see what your kid or teen has to say about it. And that leaves that open space for that honesty, and you're curious about it, and maybe they want to tell you about it, and that's how you connect. So maybe just asking questions about it.
I love that, Corinne. The get curious, right? Get curious always. And what are they getting out of it? Are you getting connection? Are you bored and you're getting fun? What are you getting out of that time that you're spending on that device? Because then we can mimic that outside of technology, right? We can find things to do together that could fulfill that goal. And also a lot of times, I think this becomes a really hard conversation when we as adults do this also, because we use our devices a lot of times to numb things out, to not think about what we don't want to think about, to avoid. It's a big avoidance thing, which is why it causes so much anxiety, right? So I think the hardest part is that if we don't acknowledge that within ourselves, it's going to be really hard to have a conversation with our kiddos. And sometimes, once again, honesty may be the best thing that we can do, letting them know, like, hey, sometimes you see me on my phone all the time. I get back from work and I'm here for an hour. And this is what happens to me after I've been on my phone for that long. How do you feel when you've been on that phone for that long? What are your suggestions about what I could do to feel better? I don't like how I feel after being on my devices for so long. So kind of make them part of the conversation And like Corinne say, like, play dumb. Can you help me? And I bet they're gonna have some incredible answers that will probably actually help you, right?
Thank you, Sarah. Before we move on to the comment in the chat, I just wanted to give Rachel, I don't know if you wanted to weigh in on this topic as well.
Yeah, I don't really work with kids that have devices. So it's mostly their Chromebooks or iPads, and those have parental controls on them. Most of the kids I work with are young enough that they don't have access to devices. But I like the suggestion of asking, what do you think I should do about getting off my device? And what do you think when I'm on it that much? Does it bother you? Things like that. Just being curious and finding out how you're, as an adult, how your device usage might affect kids that don't necessarily have access to devices.
It's a great suggestion. So in the chat, Ariana says, how do you navigate difficult conversations with someone who opens up to us about traumatic experience, such as domestic violence or sexual assault? Anybody like to jump in on that first?
Okay. I'm curious where, was somebody gonna jump in?
No, go ahead if you had a question, Sarah.
Oh, I was just curious. So if Ariana is saying opens up to us, I was curious who was the us.
I think she means herself. I'm assuming.
So someone in the, yes, okay, someone close to you or someone in your family that may be opening up about some experiences that they're having. I'm gonna assume. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I guess I'll start. I think that can be really hard to take on. And the first thing I'm going to say is that when you hear certain things that can be very triggering for you, take care of you, right? So that may not be a conversation that you can take too far. And you can always direct them to professionals who may be able to help them. In fact, I think that's probably the best option. But if you do feel like you want to have a little bit of that conversation and be a support for that person, I would say take care of yourself, know your limitations. And a lot of what people really want when they're sharing these experiences is just to be heard. So if you really feel that you're in a space where you can hold space for this person and hear whatever it is that they're going through, then I would say that it's probably the most helpful thing you can do. And it's incredibly healing. But I will also reiterate what I said at the beginning. You don't have to take all this on. And if this is triggering in any way for you, or you don't feel like you are capable of listening to this, that is okay too. So give yourself some grace on that. And we can maybe put some resources down here, but definitely you can give them information like reach out to a counselor or a professional who could be able to better help you.
Thanks, Sarah. Corinne or Rachel, either one of you guys want to weigh in?
I think, Ariana, depending on where you are, if this conversation has already happened or you're thinking it's going to happen, I think, kind of what Sarah was saying, that's really heavy information to listen to. And so maybe just reflecting the feeling that you're feeling to that person and go like, wow, I'm so thankful that, you wanted to share this with me. But you know what, like, I'm feeling like maybe this is really hard for me to hear, but you need to talk and I want to help navigate someone for you to talk to. Or if this is a conversation that's already happened and you're thinking about it now and maybe have a better grip on it, it's always okay to go back to that person and say, can I rewind a little bit? When you came to me with that conversation, I didn't know what to say. You know, I might want to like talk about it now and maybe help you if we do give you some resources. So I think there's different avenues, but just reflecting how you're feeling to that person could be really powerful.
Rachel, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I think that it was very well said, but I want to reiterate, just being a safe person for them to listen. You don't have to fix anything. You don't have to do anything. You can just be there and then help them find resources that can be helpful to them. But as parents, it's not your job to fix it. It's to hear it and help them navigate it themselves. And also, when your child comes to you with something like that, have a plan to get some sort of help for yourself as well.
And then also, just because we're all mental health professionals, if a child is, telling an adult that, we're mandated reporters. So, having to make that call if that child gives you a name of who hurt them, if it is a sexual abuse issue or domestic abuse, it needs to be reported.
And those reports can be done anonymously. So, and they can be done online. CPS reports can be done online. And so just if that's an issue, you don't have to give your specific name. Those things can be done anonymously.
And sorry, can I just bring a little something in there? And you also don't have to know much of, like, you don't have to know if it's really happening, or you don't need to be the investigator. You can do an anonymous reporting, and they will be the ones investigating. If nothing is happening, then they will find out, and that will be okay. Sorry, Kristen, I wanted to clarify.
No, that's an important point, and you can have very minimal details because, again, the investigation is on the onus of those of CPS. One thing I did want to address in terms of domestic violence specifically, for years and years and years, I worked with domestic violence victims, is that to the point that everybody else made, certainly just to listen and support them is probably the most important thing that you can do for them. But just know that, for many, if you have someone who tells you that they're in a domestic violence situation and thinking of leaving their partner, that's really the most dangerous time for a domestic abuse victim, when they're contemplating leaving, that they're never in more danger than when their perpetrator suspects or believes that they're going to leave. And so I think certainly under those circumstances, referring them to an organization like SAFE or other places that sort of have professional experience in managing these concerns is going to be really important, because that is a really difficult time in the life of someone who's going through that, and they do need professional support if they're planning to do something different. So I just wanted to make sure that I threw that in there. We're almost finished. And so if anybody has anything else that they'd like us to address in the chat, please feel free. But in the interim, I guess I kind of want to, in the interest of time, because we always end up like with 3 minutes left and things get cut off. This is just a reminder, this is going to be recorded. And when the recording is posted, there'll be some resources associated with it for folks, if that's helpful. I just wanted to take the time to thank our panelists, Corinne and Rachel and Sarah. We really appreciate you guys taking the time out tonight to support this panel discussion and to give your expertise. We really want to thank all of you who've kind of tuned in. There's lots of other things that you could be doing on a Thursday night. And we appreciate the fact that you took an hour and a half to spend it with us. I'd like to reiterate again that ACGC has a walk-in clinic. So if that's something that you feel like your child or somebody that might benefit from, you can just sort of go on our website or give us a call and we can talk to you more about walk-in hours. For those of you that contributed to tonight's event, I would like to say thank you and let you know that you really are supporting children and families who would not otherwise have access to mental health care. And many of those clients come from marginalized communities, and we just really, really appreciate that support. These panel discussions happen monthly-ish. There's usually like 8 or 9 times a year. So please stay tuned for future panelists that may come up. And we're going to do something a little bit different this time. So for the last, we're going to take like 5 minutes for those of you that are willing. And we're going to kind of just do a breathing exercise or kind of a centering exercise before we kind of leave this session and go off to what other things that we have waiting for us in our lives at home. In my case, it's dinner and dogs and whatever other things that we all have to go to after this. And we're offering this. This is the first time we've done something like this. And we're really doing it as a way to model for everybody kind of how to manage in high stress situations when you just need a minute to kind of take a step back and take a minute for yourself. And this is something that you can also teach your kids how to do. And I'm going to throw out there that any of you who have Apple Watches or devices that allow you to read your heart rate, this is a biofeedback mechanism, which means that when you start this, if you look at your heart rate when you start this exercise, and then look at your heart rate when you finish after 5 minutes, and notice that your heart rate has gone down, that's a good thing, right? Because when your heart rate is lower, it means your anxiety and your stress level is lower. And so that's really the point of this. And so that's something that you can practice and get really good at over time. And this is a sort of a technique that you can use in lots of different situations, and nobody else has to know that you're doing it, right? It can just be something that only you know that you're doing, which makes it a really, really valuable tool. And again, something that you can easily teach to kids of all ages. So we're just gonna do some deep breathing, and we're gonna sit here for a few minutes, and we're just gonna breathe and listen to our breath, and we're gonna take a minute. And any of you who want to jump off, feel free, but the rest of us are going to just sort of sit here and do some deep breathing for the next few minutes. And we just want to thank you guys all so much for coming out.